Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. I want to explore some topics in today's video. I think this is going to be one of those ones where I ramble through some thoughts I've been having in regards to Lolita fashion. Now, if you've read the title of the video, you probably already know what this is going to be about. In the general world of fashion and trends and style, whatever you want to call it, there has been a lot of emphasis on both creativity and nostalgia in the past few years. There are new trends popping up on what feels like a weekly or near daily basis sometimes, but a lot of them reference and rely on aspects of past fashions, namely the 90s and 2000s, but sometimes referencing past historical trends, periods of fashions like even the Edwardian era, or more vintage stuff like the 60s, etc., etc. And unsurprisingly, even the 2010s are now coming back slowly but surely, referencing Tumblr eras across TikTok as fashion now. And like most average millennial or person who has access to the internet, I struggle with my relationship to social media, primarily Instagram, watching all of these influencers switch through new trends at rapid paces. There's this creativity that's being pushed forward at such a rapid pace that for the average person who isn't really interested in keeping up with every single one of them, it can feel almost impossible to truly be creative when there are people who have reinterpreted a trend that popped up a week ago that you haven't even had time to explore yet. And for me, this is just weighed on me to make me feel like my own style isn't really good enough. And I struggle with this even knowing that I'm wearing Lolita in a way that is authentic to me. So what I want to explore today is this pressure in the face of both creativity and nostalgia and how it allows us to explore Lolita fashion in an authentic way. I want to consider creativity as the future, pushing us towards new things, developing new trends, and deepening our relationship to the fashion by always looking forward to what can come next, and contrast it with nostalgia as the past, which obviously asks us to look backwards to utilize trends that have gone to support a more durable fashion or wardrobe. What is the ultimate authentic way of wearing the fashion, and how do both creativity and nostalgia contribute or take away from that authentic experience? Part 1. Creativity. Lolita is a fashion that has a lot of creative impact at first glance. It just looks different from other fashions and stands out to a very high degree. I think when you're looking at Lolita from the outside in, it automatically looks more creative, more unique. And when I first began wearing Lolita fashion, every coordinate that I built really required me to put creativity into it because I just didn't have the same coordinate building skills that I have now, and I didn't have the same connection to Lolita fashion that I do now. So every single coordinate that I was building, I really wanted to be creative to the utmost degree and use my wardrobe and my time to wear Lolita to, I don't know, the fullest degree possible. It felt like I was wasting my time a little bit if I didn't really put that effort into my coordinate when I finally had the opportunity to wear it, because it was a much rarer experience. This sort of experience confirmed to me that wearing Lolita is just inherently more creative than wearing a nice shirt and jeans. It really felt like putting on a fancy dress with a petticoat and doing your best to build even the most simple cords was a creative act in itself, especially when you compare it to what is general normie wear. And I'm not even talking about fashion within the normie world or the alternative fashion world. I'm specifically talking about the average daily outfit. For example, if you compare athleisure to a casual Lolita cord, obviously, I think Lolita looks more creative than wearing yoga pants and a shirt. No shade to yoga pants and a shirt. I think they have different purposes here. But I think that the actual relationship between creativity and Lolita fashion can become a bit more complex when you stop looking at it from the outside in, because Lolita can very easily not be creative. Many brands provide matching accessories to the dresses that they're selling. Sometimes it's not a full set in the traditional sense, which is usually a dress, a head bow, and socks, but can also include accessories like wrist cuffs, rings, necklaces, blouses, even shoes sometimes, or bags that are made to match a specific dress. But Whether or not you're receiving a full set as a release from a brand, you often get matching accessories like a headdress or suggested ways of styling from the brand advertisements. Wearing full sets or recreating parts or full ads or coordinates worn by brand ambassadors, as well as recreating street snaps and coordinates from other Lolitas, is not really strange or unheard of, and is rather commonplace in Lolita fashion. I think there is a deeper conversation to have there about whose cords are acceptable to imitate. I think if you recreated one-to-one the coordinate of some random girl you're following on Instagram, it would be considered a bit weird. But if you recreate an old street snap, it's not considered strange at all to most people. And not only that, but Lolita can be very matchy-matchy. I mean, one of the most fundamental guidelines of wearing Lolita fashion is to have balance. You want to balance the volume of your pieces, balance the colors within it, balance the level of your cord, right? Do you have a ton of accessories, or are you wearing something more simple? How are you going to match all the pieces to that? Are you going to balance the theme of your coordinate patterns? I think when people think of matchy-matchy, we tend to think mostly of sweet Lolita, but I think that it just does apply to Lolita fashion as a whole. So with all these obligations in place, how far can we really push the creativity of Lolita fashion within the boundaries of those guidelines? Of course, the current state of accepted Lolita guidelines seems to be looser than ever. You can really have any kind of makeup you want, sneakers are acceptable, your shoulders can be out, so long as you follow this principal guideline of balancing things. If your shoulders are out, it should be because you're wearing a summer coordinate and you'll have like ankle socks or an overall summer vibe. You get my point. But the period of time where there were clear Lolita guidebooks that were recommended to everyone in the community kind of has passed. There are so many different places to find resources, and there's such an abundance of research that can be done on Lolita fashion that you can't really point newbies to this one guidebook and say, look, this is the thing that everyone accepts. When there's no longer a clear answer on what is or isn't a rule, perhaps this can allow us as Lolitas to push our creativity within the fashion forward. But I'd like to address this immediately and say that I am a personal fan, I don't know, of the guidelines / the rules. I don't really have any issue with them, though I do recognize and agree with the idea that there was a lot of stupid shit put forward as a rule when it never really was. Again, when you look at the shoulders things, this was considered a rule for so long to not expose your shoulders, but brands have literally always released camisoles that were specifically meant for Lolita that show your shoulders. You can look at the old GLBs and old school ads and you see exposed shoulders all the time, so it's like really not that big of a deal. You know, I think the whole upholding of rules in the community happened for a variety of reasons: mistranslations, lack of resources, or just that's what the community agreed on. But when you look at actual Lolita cords that follow the guidelines, there's so much variety within them that you come to understand very quickly that the guidelines are not as restrictive as people or new Lolitas might think. And again, the seriousness or severity of following the rules, I think, has really loosened in the last few years, and I think that it's more lax than ever, to be quite honest. So when I see new Lolitas being like, the rules are so strict, I don't want to follow them at all, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, well, what rules are you actually expected to follow other than like wear a petticoat, balance your cord, and don't buy Amazon crap? But still, you have all of these things that can allow Lolita to be very uncreative if you want them to be. You can wear full sets, you can just wear the most basic of coordinates where you match your headpiece to your shoes and you match your blouse to your socks and you wear your dress, and that's kind of it. In doing so, you will probably look good as a Lolita. You will look put together, your coordinate will be balanced, and it will be an effective Lolita cord. It will probably be very cute and very wearable. So with that being possible, why does creativity matter to us so much as Lolitas? I asked this question on my Instagram and I'd like to share a few answers here. There was a lot of good answers I received. Unfortunately, I'm a fucking idiot and I forgot to screenshot them, and now Instagram isn't showing me the answers to my expired story, so I will be relying on people who sent me DMs. Thank you so much. First of all, Frilly Lily says, while being unique isn't required to wear it, I think it makes things more exciting and personalized to oneself, whether one is new or an OG Lolita. Clary's Peach also talks about how creativity is what allows us to keep the original street style spirit of the fashion alive. And Fancy._Shinomi says, Fashion and art come hand in hand, especially in Lolita, so I feel like having a creative bone in your body is an important aspect of wearing it. Otherwise, I feel like it's hard to want to dress up because you just either have no ideas or you just look at what others are doing and copy it. It's obvious that despite the range in answers here, creativity is still something that most Lolitas think about. I think we often have this idea of a full set Chan who only wears head to toe matchy-matchy AP pieces, but this Lolita doesn't exist as often in the wild as I think that we assume it might. There's just not that much evidence of these kinds of people existing, and if they do, they're probably not wearing Lolita to be creative, but instead wearing Lolita to just be the clothes that they like. Another interesting answer, and a longer one I got, was from Fairy Penguins. For me, it's important to be creative so that I don't get bored of my pieces. I have been wearing Lolita for years and have a mid-sized wardrobe now, but I remember when first starting out, I would just wear the same cords over and over, and I would always want to sell my dresses and buy new ones because I quickly got bored of them or didn't know how to style them outside of copying other Lolitas and brand models. Now, after forcing myself to be creative and trying to incorporate new things, color combos, accessories, hairstyles, etc., I think my cords are better for it. My wardrobe is pretty cohesive rather than full of variety, but I don't get bored of it because I make a point of trying a lot of things out. I think it's important to push yourself out of your comfort zone to grow in Lolita. And I really like this statement and I agree with it quite a bit. I think that this focus on personal creativity is where Lolita differs from most general fashions and keeps the spirit of Lolita as both a fashion and a hobby alive. Instead of focusing on creativity as this idea of newness or innovation and change constantly being brought forward, Lolita instead uses creativity to solidify our own individual relationship to the global accepted fashion within the community. By playing with your own wardrobe and your own style, you can be creative in a way that suits your own life, allowing all of us to deepen our relationship to the clothes we already have, experiment with them without feeling the need to constantly change what's in our wardrobe, or I do think that should be the goal for most Lolitas. This really allows us all to preserve the foundations and history of the fashion as a street style, while also pushing our own individual creativity and self-expression to the forefront. It makes room for many different forms of creativity, whether you are adding non-Lolita items to your coordinates, whether you're trying new color combinations and pattern mixing, whether you're experimenting by combining different eras. All of this can happen within the framework of Lolita fashion because creativity within Lolita also demands that you preserve what Lolita fashion is instead of trying to completely rewrite it just for the sake of a new trend. That's why despite all of these guidelines, these expectations, these ideas that the community seems to agree on and expect, creativity is so important to most individual Lolitas and really is the framework that they wear the fashion within. Part 2. Nostalgia. In contrast to this idea of creativity and progress being essential to Lolita, we have nostalgia. Lolita as a whole is a fashion that relies quite heavily on nostalgia. After all, I would think that the majority of Lolitas have wardrobes comprised of both old and new, and the secondhand market or importance of buying secondhand in Lolita is like heavily emphasized and pretty much essential to the survival of the fashion. Trends don't really move as quickly in and out of Lolita fashion as they are currently doing in mainstream fashion. It's not on like a weekly basis. A few trends that we've had, like aprons or the general old school trend or ankle socks over tights, have existed for at least a couple years, and you can really watch the rise of trends, like the rise in popularity of OGT Suite again, happen over the course of at least a couple years. And then they tend to stick and not really disappear in a matter of weeks or months. And because of this, we often look to the past to find inspiration for our own current ways of wearing Lolita, or just continue to wear the bygone trends and styles that we like. The Lolita that I wear is nostalgic. I reference the 2010s OTT Suite era, which is an era that I never got to participate in as a young Lolita. I was a teenager when it happened and I just didn't have access to the fashion or the real motivation to actually try and wear it and explain it to my parents and get them to allow me to participate in it. But most nostalgic of all perhaps is the rise of old school as such a popular trend within the last few years. A trend which still continues to be quite strong to this day. When I originally asked my questions on Instagram, I didn't mention old school at all, but I did expect that it would come up, and I was right. A few people mentioned old school specifically when I asked questions about creativity. A Poem Is Made by Fools Like Me says, putting less emphasis on the rules and focusing instead on happiness and personal satisfaction is, in my opinion, a very authentic way to wear Lolita. I think a recent push against strict rules and a shift in mentality towards the above explains why there's been such a surge in old school over the past year or so. And Lola.True says, being able to be adaptable and come up with new, interesting ways to cord pieces is important to me. It shows how fun the fashion can be. Sometimes having a full cord of matching pieces from a brand can get slightly boring as the brand is doing the cording for you. Being adaptable and coming up with the new ideas to cord a piece is the fun part. I think looking at a lot of older street snaps, it shows how the creativity of cording pieces has maybe declined in recent years. And now my cat is going off on his catnip toy. Now, the perception of old school as more creative or free isn't really uncommon, even if it goes unspoken sometimes, I think. When we look back at old street snaps, after all, we're filtering them within our modern lens. We're not really seeing the social or cultural context of the people wearing it, the trends they might have been influenced by, and their thought process in relation to that specific coordinate. We really only see the pure image of their coordinate. We can imagine their creativity, we can see it because it's right there and it's different from what people are wearing now. So there's this inherent appeal in something different that seems immediately creative because of that difference. This is kind of inherent to what nostalgia is, right? When you look at the past, it seems better than what things are like now. I think it's also just normal that people's favored street snaps, or perhaps what we consider to be the more interesting and successful coordinates, are what get shared more and more over and over again. One, because there's just not an infinite number of coordinates to share, and probably because some of the less interesting, more unsuccessful ones end up lost to time, disinterest. Nostalgia really allows us to separate the unhappiness or unsatisfaction that some of us have with modern Lolita and what the modern brands are putting out, the quality of it, the styles, and remove that from the context of the history of the fashion. It allows us to look back at older parts of Lolita fashion and see a history that we enjoy more and recontextualize it in a way that allows us to participate in it by wearing old school or any past era's trends today. And one of the dangers of this nostalgia is that we start to assume things of the past that weren't necessarily there. To quote my friend Prince, Petit Prince, the idea of a more authentic Lolita depends on this false idea that Japanese Lolitas in the 90s to early 2000s were all wearing Lolita for this deep and meaningful way. Of course, I don't want to frame this as an inherently negative thing. Many people turned to old school or were always naturally inclined to it because of pressure from the community or general social media at large or specific people within the community to have this perfect appearance and to have this appearance that perfectly matched the trends of the time, pointing to things like bare shoulders being unacceptable to the comm at large when it has never really been an issue for Lolita brands to portray their models and their coordinates as having bare shoulders is just kind of whack. When you look at modern Lolita, which relies really heavily on complex prints and patterns and matchy-matchy styling, it can be more inspiring to look at a period of Lolita where those same pressures seemingly didn't exist. There's also the fact that there just wasn't as much Lolita available in the old school era, so people, you know, did have to make do and were more inclined to look outside of Lolita brands or to hand make things to create more. On top of that, nostalgia allows us to fulfill childhood wishes and memories and to be the authentic person that we've always wanted to be, but perhaps at a certain period of our life couldn't get access to. Oftentimes this is due to age, but other reasons can include your financial situation at another period in your life your weight or size affecting how you feel, you not being comfortable in certain clothes at a certain period, perhaps you transitioned at a certain period in your life, etc., etc. There are so many reasons that someone didn't get an opportunity to wear clothes while it was trending or when it was created. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to reach back to that era and actually participate in something that you literally couldn't access at the time. I was a self-conscious teen in the OTT Suite era. I said this before, but I still held so much nostalgia for it that remembering how much I loved looking at Lolita when I was a teenager was a part of what pushed me to actually join the fashion and participate in it. And I'm confident through referencing the OTT Suite era because it's what I feel naturally inclined to. It matches my personal style the most, and I don't have to put a lot of thinking and effort into every single chord when I'm dressing because that's just how I want to dress. However, the reason that I bring creativity and nostalgia forward as opposites is for the same reason as explained in this comment, again from fancy_shinomi. That's actually one of the issues I have with a lot of pandemic Lolitas. They just kind of got into it because of their own nostalgia of seeing 2010 Suite, old school Lolita, etc. And they're trying too hard to replicate that rather than grasp, understand, and build their own form of creative looks. So when we become so focused on nostalgia as our own defining creative element, how much of it can truly be our own? As someone who focuses so much on the 2010s era, how much creativity am I really bringing to Lolita and to my own coordinates? Am I contributing anything to the fashion? And does that even really matter? It is at the end of the day simpler to rely on the past than it is to be consumed by the trends of modern Lolita. It's easier to hunt for old dresses that I've had years to think about and long for instead of impulse buying a new release because of FOMO or the fear of missing out. But that means that I am restricting my own creativity to a certain extent, for better or for worse. I find it interesting how old school is often held up by other Lolitas, and not even Lolitas who wear old school, as more creative, right? Due to its looseness in regards to the guidelines. In most of the modern world, creativity is seen as synonymous with progress, change, innovation. But in Lolita, creativity and nostalgia are almost tied together sometimes in the idea that old school just is more creative than current Lolita, which is an idea that I disagree with, and I don't think that most experienced Lolitas would really push this forward. But for many of us who are attracted to bygone eras of Lolita fashion, whether it's old school, 2010 Suite, 2014 classic OTT, we're attracted to them because we feel unsatisfied with anything else. It's really the most useful tool we have for our own self-expression, whether it's relying on nostalgia or not. We feel drawn to these eras because of our ability to be creative with them, thanks to, and perhaps not in spite of, our nostalgia for that time. Part 3, authenticity. I set out to question these concepts of creativity and nostalgia because they were getting in the way of my relationship to Lolita, and because I'm super fucking dramatic and need to film a 20-minute long video every time I get a creative block in terms of coordinating, apparently. But I felt torn, like no matter what I did, I wasn't really being authentic. On one hand, when I pushed myself to be more creative, I felt like I was being better at Lolita, but it began to feel forced. I was so comfortable in the fashion that I just didn't feel the need to experiment to the same degree that I did when I first joined. I know what I like, I know what I want to wear, I know what feels comfortable and looks good on me, so I don't really feel this need to try and shake things up and do a coordinate that pushes the boundaries of my wardrobe more. I have always focused on wearability and long-term closet building over something super creative. I don't really think of myself as a creative person within Lolita, and I don't think my cords are particularly creative or particularly great either. Really, I just want to build nice coordinates that I like. That is kind of my sole motivation. But wearing this perhaps slightly generic or easy to build version of Lolita really began to make me feel like I was not interesting enough to be wearing Lolita. Was I wearing it like a costume? I was recycling the same ideas. Am I just attached to the look of Lolita and not the actual spirit of the fashion as a street style? Would I be more authentic as a Lolita if I was able to break free of those guidelines, to be creative? I made this video to air these thoughts, but questioning and examining these concepts really reassured me that everything I was questioning could in fact be answered rather simply. Wearing Lolita in a daily setting, no matter your own personal style, is the most authentic way to wear the fashion to me. I don't mean having to wear it every day, but simply wearing Lolita to live, to be in the world, to enjoy your day is authenticity, because the spirit and the core of Lolita fashion is self-expression, no matter how creative or uncreative you're being. Lolita can have all sorts of meanings to all sorts of people, whether you're wearing it to be creative, rebellious, comfortable, cute, edgy, whatever. I don't think your reasoning really matters so much as carrying that authentic spirit of self-expression with you. There's just something so freeing to me about wearing OTT to go grab coffee, demanding that, you know, space and attention if that's what you want, demanding your place in the world as an extremely feminine presenting person. But there's also always been this comfort to me that I can throw on a t-shirt and skirt coordinate and I'm just as much of a Lolita as I am if I'm wearing a wig and 5 head bows stacked on my head. The authenticity of this fashion relies on our own personal interpretations of creativity and nostalgia. Creativity obviously pushes us all forward. It allows us to be inspired by fashions outside of Lolita by acting alongside of them or against how fashion changes. It also allows us to bond with other Lolitas, admiring their creativity, trying our best to keep up with that inspiration. But nostalgia preserves our commitment to the fashion and the clothes we already own. Nostalgia is good not only for our own self to be able to look back and be inspired, but also for the sustainability of the fashion. You know, I don't think revamping your wardrobe every 5 years for the sake of creativity is a good thing. Not only for the environment, but for your budget, for yourself. It's very hard to build your self-esteem, in my opinion, if you're not able to look back at your past and enjoy what you were wearing a few years ago and at least understand it if you don't want to wear the same things today. You really do need a bit of both these elements of creativity and nostalgia to be able to keep that authentic relationship to the fashion alive. To me, the most authentic way of wearing Lolita will always be to just wear the coordinates that I want. And I don't need to be creative every day, and I never will be. And I like relying on nostalgia. But other days I want to push myself forward and challenge myself, and I want the image of Lolita as a creative fashion to be a part of my own life, so that I can make something new. I hope you found something relatable in this video, or at least you enjoyed hearing me ramble for however long this video will turn out to be. I really do take Lolita seriously as a part of my life. It is a huge part of my self-expression, and I want to always continue to examine and question different aspects of Lolita and, you know, give it that level of seriousness I think it deserves. I really enjoyed making this video because putting these thoughts, you know, into actual written and then recorded format helps me kind of analyze the way I feel. And I hope that, again, you can find something that you relate to in here. Maybe you completely disagree with a lot of what I said, and I would love to hear why, because I don't think that there's like a right answer to these concepts, how we interpret creativity and nostalgia and authenticity within Lolita. Though I hope that we can all agree that utilizing them to our best extent is really what allows for an authentic experience of wearing the fashion. But yes, I really hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know your thoughts as usual in the comments. I also have to say a big thank you for 1,000 subscribers. I'm working on finding the time to film a video for that, but it's been kind of crazy, so I haven't gotten around to it yet. But thank you so much to everyone who follows me, who comments on all of my videos. It really means a lot to me, and I really enjoy being able to interact with the community in this way. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in my next video. Until then, bye bye!